strictness is not a weakness. This might provide another issue concerning male underdog types. In our wonderfully evolved society, we would like to think that we don't expect all women to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, although there are probably some guys who still believe stuff like that. As absurd as it is, I have still found that from my perspective, it is still quite a cardinal sin for men to be weak. This became more apparent when trying to live around the Gulf Coast states, and even worse, trying to survive in a remote southwestern desert town where I am surrounded by hyper-functioning men and women and hyper-functioning seniors. There very well can be women and men who, for whatever reason, need to change their lives and possess a significant amount of courage. Sometimes I think that is true for a lot of people who appear as weak, but unless I walk in their shoes, I will never fully know what kinds of burdens people endure. This is often how I am misunderstood. I have suffered from a case of mistaken identity since childhood. Living with chronic debilitating illness, I was branded as a lazy, delusional, selfish hypochondriac instead of a kid who was fighting a silent battle. As an adult, I moved to Alaska, and although very friendly folks up there, this frontier attitude made them so proud of how strong they were, often produced an aversion toward the weak, especially vulnerable men. I was fired from several jobs, falsely accused, and denied care throughout my life, just because they couldn't see the weights I was carrying, nor listen to me about what I was actually suffering with. This led to a cycle of more trauma, less strength, and created a juggernaut of abuse from every environment I tried to succeed in. A lot of strong people need weak people to trample on or to compare themselves with and try to find ways to deal with their own inadequacies and insecurities. I just decided that it's not my job to be their scapegoat and pincushion and to be used as a tool, just to make these bullies feel a little better about themselves. Although it may not seem like they get much of anything out of their bullying, from what I have observed, the energy they get from weak people could be considered what basically makes them tick. This is another roadblock to creating fairness and equality, not only in the workplace, but schools, homes, charities, churches, and any other type of community where there could develop an unhealthy pecking order. I am not surprised that the same people who have an aversion toward the weak are the same kinds of people who depend on the weak, although this might seem alarming to many. If a strong person hates a weak person that much, logically they strengthen that person to be strong enough to where they no longer hate them. This simply doesn't happen. The hatred for certain races of people imposed on by other races was just another thing that enabled the slave trade and still exists today in various forms. The strong need the weak for a lot of reasons, and developing an aversion to people they misuse is a tool they use to further enable more mistreatment. Are we not men? We are Devo. Nations of people throughout history who were unlucky enough not to possess the technology to defend themselves from invading forces, no matter how strong they were in their own nation, just could not resist their oppressors. Similarly, those who might be unlucky with various traits that make them weak in comparison would likely suffer a similar fate. Hatred as well is used. Just like a predatory situation, like an ambush predator, they will go after the weakest in the herd, or a critter who is alone as well. Ironically, when it comes to the evolutionary process, it does not have a positive effect, strengthening the genes of the victimized critters in the long run. Abusers mimic animals in similar ways. However, thinning out the weak in our communities does not contribute to the evolution of humanity. It only turns us more back into predatory animals, and thus de-evolution. I grew up with a lot of sensational fantasy films in the 1980s. One of them, The Dark Crystal, was a story that made a reference to weaker creatures that suffered the abuse of the strong. I find it spooky how they personified their personal power into this stuff they called the essence of the subordinate race of beings. When the powerful people would drink it, they would get a bit better looking and feeling, while it had the opposite effect on their victims. This essence represents their power, their life force, and what a lot of Eastern religions refer to as chi, like spelled Qi, basically someone's energy. When someone is nearly powerless and vulnerable and is mistreated by someone in power, it is the energetic equivalent of someone stealing your debit card and using it until your bank account is empty. After they have taken all of your power, this is where a lot of abusers don't stop. Inflicting trauma is almost like a post-dated check. The loss follows the victim for extended periods of time while they suffer a sort of energetic debt. In this way, when a victim is completely without power and is abused, opposed to stealing their debit card, it is like stealing their credit card. It is taking even the power they don't possess yet, keeping them in a state of energetic debt. Where does all that loss of energy go? Could something else be tampering with the abuser, just as the abuser is tampering with the victim? Well, that's for another study. There are and have been a lot of influential and powerful people who are born leaders and very much deserving of their power. I used to sneer at people like Dolly Parton because of her outrageous wigs and Barbie doll physique. How tacky it was for her to have her own theme park. It wasn't until recent years that I heard a few artists singing her songs, and I started to have respect for this artist. I did not realize that she was such a gifted songwriter, in addition to obviously playing guitar and singing like Tracy Chapman on High Speed. She is also renowned as a kind of compassionate person, in addition to being a savvy and assertive businesswoman. In a 1977 interview with Barbara Walters, Parton expressed, "I've been working too hard for too long for too little," is a clear sign that her talent and her effort deserved greater compensation compared to others in her field with the same level of ticket and record sales. She knew it and wasn't afraid to say it. I know you're tired of hearing me singing about the singing Barbie doll and want more 80s fantasy references. So here we go. You lack faith in yourself more than anyone in the village and have the potential to be a great sorcerer. That was spoken by the High Aldwin to Willow in the movie Willow. In the Never-Ending Story, the phrase, know your worth, is a central theme of the hero's quest to reach the Southern Oracle. To pass the first trial, the Sphinx Gate, the warrior Atreyu must have absolute self-worth and confidence in his own value. If the subject of knowing your worth was important to writers creating media for children, perhaps they had some good ideas. When I was a kid, not only was my own household a constant degrading and humiliating experience, I also found that a lot of other kids from dysfunctional and commonly divorced homes in my generation were torn down instead of built up. For those of us who could fork out $70, we had this magical little solution in the form of a talking plush toy named Teddy Ruxpin. The clinically depressed child can muster a toothy grin while they sing along to the animatronic bear, "I am proud to be me," while ingesting plenty of Capri Sun drinks with their antidepressant pills. It was a self-esteem boosting tool for kids like me, and in addition, there were other brainwashing methods to get your lethargic children to smile again. My buddy. Raised by experts in progressive child psychology, they exposed me to the best experimental parenting America could offer, which included this bizarre build-you-up lectures sandwiched between the abuse and neglect. This was actually counterproductive because I felt like I was at times valued for what I did, as long as it remained a secret, and was hated for who I was. This also made confidence-building shit a chore as an adult because of all the past nonsense. In addition, I kept seeing alpha types pumping themselves up to the point where they thought they could walk on liquid water. Having walked on water in Alaska winters, I need to clarify that statement. It was as if there was this fake generic building up of those who have been beaten down, spewing from the mental health industry on people to somehow empower them. Providers might even go so far as to encourage their clients to appreciate their gifts and practice their hobbies, but deep down inside, this peer is asking their inner self, if I'm so good at this, why does it have to be some kind of secret? And why am I not supposed to make a career out of it? And why are they telling me this when I already know that? And why are they not telling anyone else? The end result of these self-worth pumping sessions is likely to do the opposite, or at least fail to significantly empower this peer in any productive way. This is where there must be other forms of building ourselves in healthy and objective ways. Firstly, if someone is trying to build you up, you should find a tactful way of directing those positive words to those who need to hear them. For instance, a talent scout. Secondly, when so often nobody is there to flaunt your awesomeness for you, there can be some practical steps taken. I just like to do the math, so to speak, and see others in my field who have comparable products, experience, and ideas. I take note of how much attention and compensation they are getting, and if it is fair, then I apply it to my life and set realistic goals based on as many examples as I need. If I am surrounded by people who either are in denial of what I do, in addition to those who, for various reasons, might devalue my abilities and my output, I filter out all of their unfair criticism in the context of my evaluations. I don't need an exact figure, just as long as it's not exaggerated, too high, or too low. If there are significant attributes that make your life resemble living in the dark ages, then you have to make a choice on how to cope with being surrounded by mass delusion. If you are a kid who is raised in an isolationist cult in the woods, you have to constantly resist their rhetoric and influence. You have to provide for yourself a worldview based on as much science and fact as you can possibly muster up, and within some communities, conventional science is considered an apostasy. This is where you may consider borrowing some aspects of being a cult follower in order to brainwash yourself with some blasphemous concepts like who you really are and what the universe really is. And as far as we know it, you might have to create a mantra that says stuff like, I'm surrounded by overrated and underrated people, and our value should be based on contributions to society and not popularity. If they brainwash themselves with what they believe is the truth, then why not brainwash yourself with what you know as fact? Facts are lazy and facts are late. Facts all come with points of view. Facts don't do what I want them to. Facts just twist the truth around. That's a quote from a song, Cross-Eyed and Painless from 1980, Talking Heads, written by David Byrne. As much as we try to stay as objective about ourselves and our environment as much as possible, it is always going to be somewhat flawed. However, the default, if we just relax and go downstream, is that the way we value ourselves and others will be greatly distorted unless we happen to be followed by the paparazzi and an entourage of adoring fans. As someone who focuses mostly on creative careers, whenever my self-worth gets stale, I review various projects until I start appreciating them. I have heard of therapists and motivational gurus who will tell their subjects to look at themselves in the mirror by saying saying nice things. If that works, good. I've never met anyone, especially a depressed person, who can actually do that without feeling silly and creeped out. I think it's a pretty mean thing for a leader to tell a follower to do something like that. It's way too confrontational for most. I would imagine that an overly inflated, overrated socialite would enjoy smiling and winking at themselves in the mirror while saying how wonderful they are. Positive affirmations and other forms of therapeutic self-talk are weird enough. There's no reason to be creepy. I admit that I have found a lot of results with forms of positive self-talk. Just as long as nobody else can hear it, I feel like it's appropriate and productive for me. There are other forms of positive affirmation, like affirmation graffiti. I don't want anything to spook house guests and find things that remind me of who I am, where I am, believing where I need to be. Therefore, I printed out a dozen photographs I took from image searches and kept them in a conspicuous place in my bedroom. For me, those places represent Television studios, art galleries, sound stages, concert halls, recording studios, and other symbols that represent my multimedia projects. Another example of this I have used is what I'm believing, using my faith, to relocate to a certain part of the world or climate. Although facts can deceive us at times, we must admit that we are constantly bombarded, not just by media, but by society, with overrated people getting boosted while underrated people are being put down and alienated. This creates a cult-like outcome and sometimes resembles the law and the truth. It takes a lot of time and effort to undo the effects of this continuous indoctrination. That is why we need to create habits of looking at facts, evidence, and proof in order that we remain in a state where we see ourselves as objectively as possible. In addition, we can also view our leaders in the same context. Too big to fail. Success gurus like to blame you for your failures. Freudian analysts like to blame your parents, while astrologers might blame the planet Mercury when it is in retrograde. For the most part, blaming is useless. However, I do like to find the best possible explanation in order to find what could be the problem, in order to find the best possible solution. The problem seems to be a catch-22. How to stop the unstoppable juggernaut of social anarchy. Although a snowball eventually lands somewhere, I have found that in the context of social anarchy, that snowball seems to be rolling down quite a long hill and rarely does it stop. Corporations that get too big to fail often resemble individuals who mimic those same behaviors. Occasionally, a greedy leader gets caught, and occasionally the ones that get caught might lose their power for a while to bounce back. And very rarely will a greedy leader be brought to personal ruin. It seems that most of them take their power to the grave, while some kind of successor takes their place, and that snowball just keeps rolling down some kind of endless slope. Public relations firms don't really make anyone famous until they're either clearly on their way to fame or famous enough to get more famous. A good attorney will rarely take on a case with some lonesome victim who's outgunned and outnumbered. In some ways, there is no justice for the underdog. The underdog may bark and might even bite, like the alphas do, only to have all the perpetrators and enablers put the pup back in its place to maintain some kind of order in this chaotic social system. It gives more power to those who have too much, and vice versa. How can we stop this seemingly unstoppable force, especially when the rents of society are enabling this social greed to reach epic proportions? Is there a way to break up the party? You know, that loud house party that everyone is at. Imagine it's 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, and you and your buddies are asking around where the party is at. You find about 4 houses hosting parties that night, and the first house has good music, but only half a dozen people are there. And nobody is dancing because nobody will make the first move. The second house has even fewer people, but has a pool and a hot tub. However, nobody wants to swim alone, and they just nurse their cocktails and stare at the water. The third house has an amazing spread of food and drinks, but literally nobody else was there but the party planner, who was desperately pretending to be happy. Finally, you find the fourth house, and there were about 200 people there. The living room is blasting horrid music, and it's so packed that it's hard to dance without constantly bumping into each other. The little food that was there is all gone, and nobody has enough money to order pizzas. Upstairs are naked piles of bewildered people, and in the basement is a smoke-filled mess of people doing lines and passed out. The restrooms are full of people barfing, and the neighbors are yelling at everyone, hanging out on their front lawn. The pool is overflowing with bewildered people, nearly drowning, surrounded in floating beer cans and abandoned water noodles. That's where the party is at. Your friends urge you to spend the rest of the night there. In a society that is not sick, logically, they will organize everyone in each house in equal measures. 50 swimmers, 50 druggies, 50 pervs, and 50 foodies. But in reality, this is unrealistic. I have been around a lot of party people. In fact, I was raised in a party town where a lot of socially and economically strong people from all around the nation like to buy up the expensive real estate and get down nightly with all the cover bands, cannabis clubs, strip joints, and all the trendy artsy-fartsy pageantry. People envy me growing up in such a paradise. When I tell them what it was actually like from my experience, they still don't understand. The fact is, from the perspective of all the alphas I grew up with, they loved it. And many of them remained or returned to their beloved hometown. It takes certain kinds of people to navigate a lifestyle within these kinds of communities where everyone seems to be fighting to hold on to everyone's attention. Ironically, these are kinds of places where most people tell me to move to. I suppose it's because I am a gay artist and activist. I am supposed to live in a trendy town according to popular belief. Every place in the United States has a little mecca where the cool kids go. These conversations always seem to end with a total denial of status and ranking. It is what you make of it. Rarely applies when an underdog expects to be treated with fairness and equality in the midst of a dog pile of flashy influencers. Sadly, this poses another conundrum for me personally. As a teacher, composer, writer, entertainer, activist, and artist, how do I make a living trying to function staying in the middle of nowhere? Until this sick and socially chaotic society learns to recognize and compensate for the loss of status and ranking issues concerning those who are forced to the bottom of our beloved pecking orders, many of us have to find ways to cope. Barking more and wagging less is really not a good idea, considering the underdogs are basically ignored anyways. If there's one sort of adhesive bandage we can apply as a quick fix regarding these issues, is simply this. Some of us have to work much harder to get very little results, if any. Power comes easily to the alphas. They get featured because of their popularity. They get asked to participate in stuff to draw more attention to their stuff. When an underdog actually delivers a tangible and relevant product, the alphas will not only bite them, they will sick their followers to do the same. One way to see this kind of social sickness is the principle of dominators versus creators. Dominators dominate, and creators gain the rewards of their efforts, while desperately keeping the creators a secret. American artist Margaret Keane is a prime example of this principle. This is just some of the extra effort that is required for a creator to seek fairness and equality. The irony is that it's not equality that the creators should be after anyways. It's like the tale of two Steves. Wozniak created the first Apple computers, and Jobs got rich and famous as a result. But I like to try to be nice to our fabulous influencers. After all, they take such great selfies. In my experience, the doors that are open to the alphas are the ones I have to bang on and suffer mostly rejection. In addition, they seem to have a sort of key to a secret back door anyway. Well, telling everyone else just to keep knocking and not to give up. Therefore, I have to not only spend more time creating a better product, I also have to invest a tremendous amount of time, resources, energy, and funds into efforts that do little to nothing in order to get staggering results. After a season of little to no results, I have little choice but to give up for enough time to gather my strength and try again. It's no wonder why so many creative people end up the way they do. If you see someone who's significantly recognized for what some might call a creative career, I have learned based on my experience, having worked so closely with so many of these kinds of folks, that they are nothing more than a bully who has fought their way to be crowned king of the hill while standing on a limp and exhausted bodies of the weakened individuals who couldn't fight any longer. Seriously, they are very strong people. And I have a lot of theories as to why they can hack into what seems to be creative abilities. Basically, you see a recognized creator. Likely she or he is just a dominator who has somehow gotten everyone to think they are authentically creating something original. In addition to that, their followers are often in some kind of hypnotic trance, rounding up more recruits in a sort of cultish crusade to increase an already overwhelming fan base. Even underdogs get a kick out of getting other underdogs to follow their particular leaders because there is, on some kind of unseen level, a little perk that comes with having a tad bit of influence while participating in something much bigger than themselves. It's another reason why entertainment and religion are basically the same thing. They all have their evangelists. Everyone likes it when you smile and listen to them and talk about their suffering and accomplishments, while you wag your bushy tail, you sit and beg and play dead, and they throw you a bone. And that's how social anarchy maintains a sort of order, as long as the alphas are the ones barking and biting. As much as it can be unproductive for the runt of the pack to dare to bark at their blessed leaders, sometimes that's all we have, considering the fact that this same sick society has managed to knock out all of our teeth. Very rarely does the squeaky wheel get the grease when it comes to social chaos, because it tends to get nothing but blows or just plain ignored. But if you have no more teeth, sometimes that's all you can do is bark, bark, and bark. Although fiction rarely gives us answers about life, especially concerning gifted special needs people. I like how the creators and the writers portray the character Sheldon Cooper, Big Bang Theory and young Sheldon. Sometimes resort to him simply as annoying people in order to get his way. Felons can get legal aid. Driving over the speed limit can often just get you a fine or sometimes just a warning. Lying, cheating, and stealing might produce a slap on the wrist, and for some worse for others. But in my experience, when you annoy people, especially successful party planner type people, it is as if I've committed mass murder. The punishments are as cruel as they are sadly socially acceptable. If you refuse to be anyone's doormat, it might cause your community to think you have lost your conscience because you are no longer people's therapist on call at no charge. If you start barking and keep barking when it comes to all of your suffering, your needs, and your accomplishments, this might just ruin any more opportunities to advance in any area of your life and even get others to believe you have no compassion. This might force you deeper into obscurity and could make you want to move to the other side of the globe. However, sometimes a constant barking just might lead to something better, if not a muzzle. If that's the case, that is when you stop barking and just resort to growling. That is another explanation of why so many gifted people in these kinds of situations suffer from immense trauma and statistically are likely to self-destruct.